So thank you, Jerry, very much. And I was deeply honored to, and really profoundly astonished to get this award from the Center for Ethical Leadership, an organization that I really admire a lot. And I just want to thank the center and also thank all my friends and colleagues and friends who are here tonight. So I turned 60 on my last birthday, and I've been in a rather contemplative time about where my life has been and where it may go in the future. So Center for Ethical Leadership asked us to speak about our own story of leadership, and that actually proved to be a rather delightful assignment for me. I realized as I sat with that question that there have been consistent threads through my life that have woven themselves through really many, many years, and there have been a number of choice points or pivot points that I have run into that have really created different chapters in my life. And I'm aware that I'm on the brink of some new chapter, but I don't know what it is yet. And so taking the time to really reflect on my journey of leadership was really a gift to me. And so I don't really want to be up here speaking, but I'm glad that I had the assignment to do what I did. So I just want to share a little bit of my reflections with you all. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, in a pretty typical middle-class family. As a child, I developed a really deep sense of wonder and curiosity about nature, and it really set me on my path to becoming a scientist. I was the kind of kid who went barefoot all summer, and I had a bug collection that I just loved. And I don't know that kids do bug collections anymore, but I sure did. After getting a PhD in biochemistry, I wanted to get back to the Pacific Northwest, and in 1984, which it was 30 years ago this spring, I was lucky enough to end up in Seattle in the Discovery Research Group at a fledgling biotech company called Immunex. It turned out to be a very special place, and I was there for 18 and a half years, and there were many gifts that came from my time at that company. During my first few years, I was actually doing hands-on science, and I actually did it very well. I always have been good with my hands. I was publishing a lot of papers, and I was actually invited to speak at conferences all over the world. And so, I was in the building the scientific career part. And then I was promoted to director of the biochemistry department. And I had a group of people to support, and I also had a new role as really part of the leadership of the Discovery Research Group. So I ran into one of my first, and I had just met Dennis, my future husband, and so I had a lot of things that I needed to really be balancing and choosing from. And at work, I really ran into one of my first choice points, and I made a conscious decision to step back from building my own scientific career and focus my efforts on building the good science that could be done at the company and really being of support to those around me. I learned that when I was willing to stand up as a voice for collaboration, a voice for caring for the people there, and focusing on what was the common good at that place, that many of my colleagues would usually join me. And that standing up and learning that was really a formative leadership learning for me. In the mid-1990s, the universe started tapping me on the shoulder. I started to have more questions than answers. And even though my scientific training was quite left-brained and linear, I started to really find out and realize that was only part of who I was. I actually had a very right-brained, intuitive, connect-the-dots part. And I was starting to realize that much of that side of myself was really more in sync with my core values, really more who I was, and really the place that my leadership flowed from more. So, and during that time, my deep love of nature was also starting to really raise its head again, and I began to touch for the very first time sort of a conscious sense of the spiritual in nature for me. So I began to explore and participate in different ways outside of my regular job. I began to realize that what I was seeking and exploring were several things. The first was reconnecting with my love of nature and my deep reverence for the earth. It was a time when I was really beginning to grapple with my sense that everything's connected and interdependent. And, what did that mean? What was I going to do with that? And it was a time of a deepening awareness that my heart was really calling me to be more active in working towards a more sustainable world. So I dove into, amongst other things, I dove into leadership learning, including participating in the Citizen Leaders Institute, which was the core program of the Center for Ethical Leadership at the time. It was about a year-long program, and I began, in part from that training, what has become a continuing journey for me, which is really the question of what kind of leadership is our world calling for, and where is my place in that? I also decided to jump into learning more about working with people and community during that time. From 1996 to 1999, the city of Seattle had launched an amazing and ambitious citywide neighborhood planning process that some of you remember, and Karma Reuter was director of that, which is of that whole program, which is where I first met Karma. And at the time, my neighborhood in West Seattle, where I lived, Morgan Junction, had been designated as an urban village. And for 4 years, I jumped into being part of that. And for 4 years, I was part of the small core team that was leading the planning efforts in that neighborhood. It was, I think, the hardest work I have ever done in my life. But I learned a ton. Really hard to get everyone, really identify stakeholders, get everyone on the same page, and really have a vision that comes forward that a community embraces. And really core work, I think, in our world with going forward. Coming off of that experience, I made a conscious pivot at work as well. I was really starting to struggle with how to bring my concern about the health of the planet into my work at a human health company. And I realized an opportunity was presenting itself that I could try and step into. In 1999, Immunex was embarking on the process of building a new research campus, a new home and research campus on the waterfront at Inner Bay, which is now the home of Amgen. And I sold the company on a new role for myself as the scientific liaison on the core team, which would be working with all the architects and engineers, et cetera. At the time, Immunex was very far from green, and besides being part of building the best collaborative research campus, my secret goal was to be a voice for sustainable design and new, greener building practices. A new Sustainable Building Advisor program, co-sponsored by Seattle Central Community College and Seattle City Light, was being launched that year for the first time, so I jumped in and took that certificate program on the side to give myself some new tools. And I actually lived into my secret goal. My voice speaking up for sustainable building practices on that project made a huge difference. And I watched it embolden others to speak up as well. So I was in the middle of that, and I was having a blast. It was a wonderful collaborative process. And then in October of 2000, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And by December, I was starting chemo, and the hair was starting to fall out. So it threw a rather big unknown into my path going forward and sparked contemplation for me on things I felt were important to me that I hadn't yet stepped into. And one of those things was philanthropy. Giving back and supporting nonprofits during doing work I cared about was something I'd been doing on a small scale for years. However, while I was busy being a scientist at Immunex, the success of the company was really gifting me with the opportunity to ramp up my philanthropy to a more substantial level. So that December, I just decided I needed to move on that piece of my life, and after some wise advice, within a few days I set up a philanthropic fund called a Donor Advised Fund at the Seattle Foundation, which is the largest community foundation in our region. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The hardest part of doing that on short notice was what I should name the fund, because they all have names. So, what was it for, and did I even want my name on it? As I sat with that question, I realized that yes, indeed, I wanted my full name on it as another way of being visible with my values. So I named it the Linda Sue Park Fund for Gaia, Gaia being the name given to the earth in Greek mythology. Since that time, I've had the privilege of helping to support a lot of good work and good people working in various ways towards the common good through grants from this fund, and I continue to do that. I finally finished all my cancer treatments in August of 2001. I was looking forward to recuperating while the building project, kept on going, which I was still working with. And then 4 months later, in December, my colleagues and I learned, to our total dismay, that the company was being sold. And it wasn't going to be pretty. It was dismantle, layoffs, etc. The day after hearing that news, I had this whole idea come into my head about starting some kind of philanthropic endeavor that would live on beyond the demise of the company, that would carry on the best of the culture that we'd built, which was really collaborative and really creative, facilitate people staying connected, and also create something of lasting value that would benefit the local community. I ran around the building talking to people about the idea, and within 2 weeks, there was a group of 15 people from various parts of the company that had stepped forward and said, yes, let's try and make this happen. I may have had the idea, but I would have gone nowhere if that group of people hadn't stepped forward to do it together. And I would disagree with Jerry. I'm not the founder of Sustainable Path. I'm one of the co-founders of Sustainable Path, and that's an important differentiation for me, actually. And this was really the start of another piece of my leadership journey that was very much about leading with and the power of creating together. So after that, things had to move fast because the buyout was coming, and none of us had any experience with starting something like this. I'd never been on a board. I didn't know what, well, okay, we're gonna do this. And then building on the relationship I already had with the Seattle Foundation for my personal philanthropy, we were able to set up our new group philanthropy as a donor-advised fund at the Seattle Foundation as well. And this proved to be hugely helpful for the fledgling organization in a lot of ways, the most immediate being that we now could accept tax-deductible donations before the company was actually bought and begin to raise funds. By July of 2002, when the buyout of Immunex was complete, we had already raised over $500,000 from a whole bunch of different folks, and we were well on our way. When the buyout was complete, I also made another pivot myself. I had a job offer at the new company, but I turned it down and launched into full-time, or my husband would say more than full-time, volunteer work helping to build the foundation. In 2003, the foundation launched both a grant-making program and an annual seminar series that has been its core work since that time. It's now an independent 501c3 with the name Sustainable Path Foundation. And the organization continues to operate as a group philanthropy, people doing philanthropy together, that promotes sustainability in the Puget Sound region through collaborative approaches informed by scientific understanding and systems thinking. While Sustainable Path has funded a wide array of organizations and projects over the years, the threads of interconnectedness, scientific understanding, systems thinking, and the importance of collaboration and community have been consistent throughout. Grounded in this approach, I'm very proud to say that the foundation has granted out more than $1 million to organizations making a difference in the Puget Sound community over the past 10 years, and held many dynamite seminars that have engaged and educated the public. In the first year Sustainable Path was founded, I had the good fortune to be accepted into a year-long leadership program at the Whitby Institute called The Powers of Leadership, which I started in fall of 2002. This provided me with great learning about leadership, as well as providing a fertile ground for imagining and living into what this new foundation could become. One of the most profound learnings to emerge for me from that training was the concept of vocation. Vocation, not work, not career, but a calling, really. This is how it was defined for us. Vocation is the place where the heart's deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. The place where the heart's deep gladness meets the world's deep hunger. I found myself at a solstice gathering with friends that December, at which I was inspired to write down my vocation on a solstice card, this one that I had with me that still sits on my desk. What I wrote in here is over 10 years old, but it still underpins how I want to show up in the world, what work I want to be involved in, and where my leadership flows from. And here's what I wrote. My vocation: be a model and a voice for the interconnection of all that is in our world, seen and unseen. Be a model and a voice for the sacredness of the earth and the inherent value in all species. Be a spark and a spirit behind ideas and solutions that allow humankind to live in harmony with these truths. As I mentioned at the beginning, I feel like I'm on the edge of another pivot point and I don't know what is in front of me. I've become very aware of a longing to do more tangible hands-on work, and I'm sitting with the question of how leadership might show up for me in that realm. I'm also profoundly aware that not everyone sees the world as interconnected as I do, and I'm sitting with the question of how an interconnected world goes from being an intellectual concept to tangible realities that really land for people. With both these questions in mind, I just finished taking a 6-month course in permaculture design that I've wanted to take for years, and interestingly enough is taught by an old colleague from Immunex who left there and became a permaculturist. Strange how these things work. Permaculture is really a design approach based on a set of ethics, principles, and practices that is very practical and very much based on interconnections and care for both the earth and for people. One instructor, a rather renowned permaculturist, said something at the end of his presentation that landed for me with more impact than almost anything else in the course. It gave me a beginning sense of what leadership might look like for me in whatever my next chapter is. So I want to leave you with his words, and you'll have to excuse one of them, please. Here's what he said. Stop worrying that permaculture isn't mainstream. It's not just a fad. The single most important thing you can do is to get out and learn something, do something, gain experience at actual things. Don't worry. Just make sure your handprint is bigger than your footprint. What matters is to do something. Expect nothing. Blame no one. Just get out and do epic shit. Thank you.